Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of SCI, Singapore College of Insurance, allow me to extend a warm welcome to all, and thank you all for joining us uh, on this webinar on marine cargo insurance, the market landscape. Right now, next slide, please, Darren. Thank you. My name is Perry. I'm heading the technical training department at the Singapore College of Insurance, and I shall be your MC for this afternoon. Before we begin, just let me give a brief introduction of our speaker this afternoon. Our speaker this afternoon is none other than Mr. Neil Petit. He has 47 years of market experience, including 38 years in the London market and nearly a decade in Asia. Neil is highly respected in the field of marine cargo insurance. And before relocating to Asia, he managed business from the region that was placed in the London market. Neil has lectured extensively at various institutions, including the UK's Marine Week course, accredited by the CII, Lloyd's Academy, as well as Erasmus University. He has spoken at various platforms, as you can see, and also Neil contributed technical input to the Willoughby publication, Insuring Cargoes, A Practical Guide to the Law and Practice, where he's formally acknowledged in the preface. Next slide, please. Right, so this is the synopsis. The title of today's webinar is Marine Cargo, Current Market Landscape. The synopsis is shown here. This is a 1-hour webinar. Thank you. Okay, but before we proceed to the main presentation, here are some courses that you may be interested. These are short courses coming up in November in relation to marine cargo, goods in transit, marine liabilities insurance. Next slide. We also have a course on marine cargo insurance basics. My colleague will drop the links to these courses in the chat a bit later. If you have any queries on these courses, please let us know. Next slide, please. Okay, it's poll time. Let's have 2 or 3 poll questions so that we know and can gauge your interest and level of knowledge in this area. First poll question. Yes, poll number 1 is displayed on the screen now. Okay, which of the following do you think has the biggest current impact on global marine cargo flows? Right, just 10 seconds to input your answer, please. Starting from now. Okay, let's close the poll. Okay, Neil, please take note, right? So 52% said trade sanctions and export controls, followed by regional conflicts, changes in global demand. Okay, thank you, Darren. Let's close this one. Next poll, please. Okay, poll number 2, when clients face cost pressure, which area do you find most commonly compromised? 4 choices are shown here. Okay, let's close the poll. Okay, 47% said adequate coverage limits or extensions, followed by 34% that said cargo risk assessments and survey standards. Okay. I think we have one more poll, right? Correct. Yeah. Which emerging cargo risk do you believe will pose the greatest challenge in the next 2 to 3 years? Okay, let's close the poll. Well, okay. Majority, 36%, cited lithium batteries and EV components, followed by renewable energy equipment. Okay, so I trust this will give insights to Neil on the audience opinion of the current market landscape for cargo. Let's close this. Thank you. Okay, so without much further ado, let me hand it over to our speaker for today. Over to you, Neil. And Neil, you may wish to share your slides on screen. Thank you. You have to unmute your mic. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. I hope that, right. Okay. Let's see if we can share that. There we go. Is that coming through? No, not yet.
I can see the slide. Yeah.
Ah, right. Okay. Okay. So you can see the slide. I can only see me. But that's okay. Right. Where's my clicker gone? Where has my clicker gone? Ah, there it is. Okay. Thank you very much for giving up your time, guys. Um, and arranging this. By way of a change, I've been given a sort of free hand to talk to you about all sorts of things on marine, well, particularly marine cargo. Now, when I sat here and tried to put this presentation together, a whole bunch of thoughts came about. So I figured that we need to talk about economic and the geopolitical aspects, information and competitiveness, together with evolving risks such as the lithium batteries and cost pressures and versus the protection. Now, all assured, I'm sure that you're aware, um, are very much into reducing costs. Insurance is seen as a cost to them. Um, because of the cost to them, uh, that cost gets passed on. So, okay, obstacles. Now, the obstacles are, uh, as I've put up there, not just limited to the insurance world. We have all sorts of things that we may need to consider. And also, other parties have the same sort of restraints to some of these obstacles. We have economic and political legislative issues, which I've sort of like bunched everything all together, which basically means that with cargo, we're talking about international trade. We're talking about goods moving from A to B or B to C or A to Z. It depends on which environment you're talking about. Um, but nonetheless, a lot of these things I figured came into a collective pool of thoughts and thought processes whilst putting this thing together. Now, we all understand that trade has to be legally lawful. Now, I've used those two particular words. I'm not a lawyer. I never have been, although law does actually um, come into the equation when dealing with cargo business. Now, the use of the words legally lawful. As I understand it, you can have something that is legal but is not lawful. You can also have something that is lawful but not legal. There is a tangle here between those two particular words. And consequently, we have to make sure that everything is all in the correct box. So, as I see it, we're going to have additional pressures with regards to things like growing tightening of compliance. I made a innocent comment many years ago about the fact that being legally lawful and compliant within all of the various bits and pieces, the one growth area within insurers and indeed insurance brokers was in fact the number of people not necessarily doing the job, but the number of people that can be actually employed and taken on in order to ensure that we as an industry and as a business, as individual companies, have sufficient guidance to understand what is legally lawful. Lastly, I sort of put a thing in here about the human factor. Uh, Now, the human factor, this goes to sort of underwriting and broking. The need to measure a risk, the need to understand liability and exposures. We have a scenario at the present time where everything is going AI and automated, and the concept is that marine cargo, in particular cargo, is pretty simple. It's automated. It's um, off the shelf. Well, I would take a different view on that in terms of, from my perspective, um, insurers and brokers need certain skills in order to be able to understand how to measure risk, liabilities, and exposures. Um, Underwriting is not an exact science, but nonetheless, the idea is that a premium is paid, and so therefore a profit is made by the insurers. So let's have a look at the global market as we stand. And from my perspective, and I've said this earlier on, um, the cargo market is basically governed by the global trade. People have to buy and sell stuff in order to make the world turn round. Money has to exchange hands. Goods have to exchange hands. So the buying and selling of products, which connects manufacturers, consumers, and all other parties, we need global access. We need to understand where things are going. And insurance is just that little tiny part within the whole environment of global trade. When the global trade slows down, that therefore means that most countries or many countries are going to feel some form of impact. GDP is the measure that is used by many of the world's economies to understand exactly who's producing, who's buying, who's selling, etc. Now, when we figure into all of that, we then have issues with regards to political stuff. Now, the political stuff um, is totally beyond insurers' control. We are at the whim of individuals, politicians, um, presidents, if I dare go down that particular route. And so consequently, sanctions are a real key issue, which goes back to the earlier point, the tightening of legislation, the need to actually have compliance, the growth area within the insurance world appears to me to be somebody who's gone through the legal system. Um, Now, the sanctions, importantly, um, not only applies to insurance, but those same sanctions can impact all parties, external parties, to the cargo transaction. So for the cargo transaction, you would have, for argument's sake, banks, you would have shippers, you would have logistics providers, you would have a buyer, you would have a seller, and a lot of these people are based in different countries. From the insurance perspective, you have an insurer that is based in Singapore, for argument's sake, but their head office and their monetary funds may be supplied by the US or Bermuda or some other offshore area. Now, all of a sudden, we're introducing different parts of the world to the potential of issues. What is legally lawful in the US may not be legally lawful in, say, China. Nobody, there is the potential minefield. But we then have issues with regards to sanctions. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about sanctions in the next slide. But from my perspective, we have sanctions, then we have local law changes. Sanctions are generally something that is coming in immediately. There is no prior warning, or maybe there is a slight hint, but nonetheless, there is still no prior warning that these things are coming in. When locally law changes come in, there is usually a longer lead time for those laws to be arranged locally, for the impact to be felt locally, and for some form of local discussion. Sanctions, however, there is no discussion. That's it. It's put down. There it is. You have to comply. Now, there is also economic issues as well that are involved with any of these political decisions. So the political impacts on the economics, I've put a question up there, is the concept of free trade for the world now dead? Because of things such as tariffs. Now, when a tariff is introduced by country A, surprise, surprise, the country that has just been subject to those tariffs are probably going to respond tit for tat. Not necessarily the way in which the free trade around the world was operating maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, where free trade was really dominating the way in which countries were trading with each other. So the other element to this is that if there is a tariff, who is going to be paying the tariff? When is the tariff actually going to be imposed? How is it going to be imposed? These are things that we have to understand when tariffs are actually announced. There's also this other horrible word that is sometimes used, embargo. Now, embargo is basically a banishment as opposed to a tariff. A tariff allows for the shipment, but an embargo actually stops those particular commodities, things, etc., that are entering into the country. Social. Now, social media has a big play in today's marketplace. It's nothing to do with insurance. However, the power of social media, the way in which it influences not only individuals in terms of our individual Facebook page or whatever TikTok page or whatever social media is actually being followed, can in fact influence the insurer, influence the broker, influence the trade. Then there's the external market external, as I've used the phrase. Now, the market external, what I was really gearing here is that in today's world, it is very easy for data to be acquired through the internet because quite clearly Google knows everything. Um, but again, these types of data may be raw data and may be data that people don't necessarily understand. They're just grabbing a bunch of numbers and saying, oh, right, okay, this is great stuff. Now, if I develop on that political element, um, I said about the sanctions. Um, when we talk about sanctions, sanctions are levied at a high level through the United Nations. Now, the United Nations sanctions are almost sacrosanct. They get agreed at the UN Council, and all of the countries that are member states within the United Nations all agree to accept those particular terms. So, for want of a better expression, and relating this to Asia, in effect, any trade that is dealing with North Korea is sanctioned. That basically means that if we pretended that there was a map, um, South Korea is an island. It's no longer connected because nothing can happen in North Korea. We then have other types of sanctions. And again, the question here with regards to the other types of sanctions is that sometimes these are levied against individuals, individual companies, or individual people. Um, how are these going to be policed? The only way in which these can be policed is let's have a few more lawyers in the back room actually helping us out, going through the process, looking at these companies, seeing who they're owned by, whether or not we can or cannot deal with these particular companies. Now, the interesting thing here is that with SDNs, you can sometimes get different reactions from different compliance people. Sometimes the compliance says no. In some instances, the compliance says, yeah, no, that's fine, that's okay. So policing of these blanket sanctions are very, very difficult. For argument's sake, the oil sanctions. Yeah, fine, okay, but there's oil sanctions in respect of the oil price that is coming from the oil out of Russia. Now, how is that being policed? Oil is traded so very often, and very often actually ship to ship transfers, etc., etc. Ownership can actually be lost. Origins of that oil can also be lost because there could well be a long chain of companies that have been involved, buying, selling, moving it on, and each company is going to add their bit in. Now, if the intention of the price, if the price at the time of the original purchase was under the $60, by the time that it's changed hands four, five, six, seven times, you've got four, five, six different trading elements that have been involved with that. Each of those are going to be wanting to add on their proportion or their share or their profit for trading those particular commodities. So policing of some of the sanctions is very, very difficult. We need guidance. We need guidance as a market. We need guidance as individuals. Sometimes the penalties for breaching of sanctions can be quite painful. I, as you can probably tell, am a Brit. Um, the UK introduced a legislation in respect of the movement of arms and munitions because arms and munitions were actually changing hands so many times. So I used to run away and hide under a desk when somebody was talking about a particular military organization that I was going to be placing a risk on behalf of, even though I had no relationship to that military force or that government organization. I hid under the table. No, I don't want to get involved. I didn't want to get involved because I personally then had to get involved with filling out forms for the UK to say what it was that was being transported from A to B, dirty, dirty, dirty. And if it was found that I was actively involved in this and I didn't report, I could be invited by His Majesty the King to stay in one of his hotels at his pleasure. Or if there is a similar law in Singapore, you could be invited to for a short hotel stay or maybe a longer hotel stay at Changi. Now, when we look at the political environment, um, I've put up on the board here um, things like the Middle East. Well, Middle East has always been an issue in respect of cargo insurance. Ever since I can remember, the Middle East has presented us with concerns in respect of the Persian Gulf since the overturning and the change of regime within Iran. Um, the overthrowing of the Shah of Iran, and therefore the taking over and making Iran into um, a Muslim state being governed effectively by an Ayatollah rather than through the Shah. Um, there was the threat of the Ayatollah and the Revolutionary Guard to sink ships across the Straits of Hormuz. Well, the insurance industry took that as a particular threat, but that's still a threat that exists today. That threat has been in existence for, oh, goodness knows, maybe even 30, 40 years. As we sit here today, the current focus appears to be on Iran and the proxies of Iran throughout the region. The key proxy that we're focusing on at the present stage happens to be the Houthis. The Houthis in Yemen. They've caused all sorts of issues in the marine cargo world because the shorter sea route between Europe and Asia, i.e., the Suez Canal, has basically been closed off. Ships, ship owners, operators have all decided, well, not all of them, but many of them have decided that these waters in the Red Sea, because you go through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea, are really too dangerous. Nobody understands how, why, and all the rest of it. The Houthis are targeting certain vessels. They have come out publicly and made their statements, but nonetheless, vessels have been damaged, hijacked, probably not the right word, but taken forcibly by the Houthis, held for ransom, um, because of potentially some of their involvement with Israel. The Houthis arranged attacks on some of the Saudi oil um, refineries and factories. So the Houthis were causing a particular problem. But what is the knock-on impact? Well, the knock-on impact, which nobody ever foresaw, I would suggest, the Houthis are damaging the economy of Egypt. Egypt has lost somewhere in the region of 50, maybe even 80% of their values in terms of the throughput on the Suez Canal, the fees that they charge, which is actually damaging the economy of Egypt, which I would suggest was never the intention. The Houthis' intention was to, when you look at their public announcement, was to um, aim their frustration, aim their anger at persons, people, companies, etc., that happen to be supporting, um, in their view, Israel. So I've also put on there Russia, Ukraine. Now, I understand that overnight, the US have now introduced further sanctions against Russia and the Russian oil industry in order to try to um, look at the economic impact that they can have on Russia by trying to strangle the amount of money that they are earning in respect of their oil. Conscious of the fact that we're talking about Asia and Asian markets, the Asia market also has its own tensions. You have North Korea, who occasionally decide to launch a ballistic missile to see how far it could go. There is the process of North Korea gaining some form of nuclear weapon, which obviously nobody wants to think about. And if we look a little bit wider, then there is the South China Sea. Now, the South China Sea is an area of the world which is in huge dispute at the present stage. You have many countries that are trying to make a claim in the South China Sea, probably because of the mineral resources, i.e., oil, um, that could be extracted. There's a claim by many countries, but China says it's theirs. So China and Philippines at the present stage are having a squabble. Um, it's seen many times in many of the news items that there has been clashes with the coast guards of the Philippines and China. In addition to which, you've also got the issue regarding um, Taiwan. Taiwan, part of the Republic of China, but China wants it to be run by China, not by a democratically elected um, government, and allowing the democratically elected government to do what they want to do, as opposed to doing what they are told to do by Big Brother in Beijing. So there are many issues in terms of the political element. Now, if we look at the economics in terms of the global trade, um, we've basically covered most of these earlier in respect of the trade embargoes, the tariffs, the additional taxes and levies. But of course, together with this, I've put in there things such as climate pressures, and economics that can be impacted by the way of climate change. A prime example of that would be the lack of water that was noted earlier on this year for the Panama Canal. Vessels were being limited, or in terms of numbers, being able to go through the Panama Canal because there was insufficient water to be able to change the levels through the lock gates of the vessels that were transiting from the west coast to the east coast of the US. Inflationary pressures. Well, every time that things are priced upwards, there is going to be pressure placed on inflation. Price of goods goes up, wages have to go up. So consequently, we're into that economic circle of everything pushing around everything else. Human intervention, well, that could take into account many different things. Just going back to the climate change, we're understanding that we've often hear about El Nino and El Nino or Nino. These types of forces are things that we as insurance people cannot control. They are totally naturally occurring. Obviously, there's not a lot that we can do about it, but they raise issues as far as we're concerned. Logistics and routing. Now, when the Red Sea was closed off, a lot of the container ships gave rise to going the long sea route round South Africa, which was fine, other than the fact that you are now introducing different weather systems. And indeed, you could potentially find yourself in a situation whereby um, the infrastructure, should a vessel get into trouble, is not anywhere near South Africa. One of my friends was saying to me that because of these particular changes, the concept of needing bunker fuel for the vessels, that infrastructure was not there and was not available um, for vessels going around the South Africa. So consequently, there was a mad rush in the shipping world to actually make sure that they had sufficient bunkers to be able to do the additional mileage. The social and internal influences. Now, I've spoken a little bit at length earlier on about the people power and about compliance and governance. One of my big bugbears is that the compliance and the compliance issue in terms of what is legal and what is not legal differs from lawyer to lawyer, differs from advisor to advisor. So consequently, what is deemed to be okay by one person may not necessarily be okay by another person. So you can have issues where you have a subscription market placement where insurer A says, yeah, that's fine. But insurer B says, no, I can't do that. So what then happens? You then have to have a differential element in terms of a placement. The information and statistics, well, I think I've covered that. But I'd just like to sort of like cover that a little bit further in terms of how are these understood? How are these numbers, which people are grabbing from the internet, how are they explained? Clients would potentially go to the IUMI website, get these magnificent presentations that have been done by IUMI. And I'm not trying to bash IUMI here. They are the only real source that we have got of understanding the health of our business. They are the source of information that otherwise is only or possibly only recorded by individual companies, but then trying to get that information into a format that is then useful is very difficult. So consequently, what we have is a bunch of numbers which are being bandied around. And I note in particular that the IUMI numbers are based on gross premiums, not net premiums. So when they turn around and show these magnificent figures, we've had X amount of new premium income, da di da di da, and there's based on 50% loss ratio. Well, hold on, wait a minute. The claims that were written for those particular premiums are probably going to come in on the following year. So that again is something misleading. We then have, in terms of the external, reinsurance issues, reinsurance treaties. Reinsurance treaties, in particular, when a lot of companies were going through the cyber element, we're all using different clauses. There is no standard uniformity. Now, this becomes a problem. If there is no standard clause which is being imposed by the reinsurer on the reinsurance treaty, it's quite understandable that the facing insurer would actually pull that clause down to mirror his reinsurance protection. The problem that you've got, or the problem that we have, is that in some instances, different reinsurers are wanting different clauses. I've put up there the Trump factor. Well, I don't really want to go into that. Shipping and logistics. No, most interesting, this one. The need to find alternative routes. Just recently, China managed to negotiate with Russia the Northern Passage through the Arctic. Now, in order to transit northwards, it resulted in a vessel, which I've got the name of the vessel here, a Chinese container ship called the Istanbul Bridge, recently took that particular route out of China through the Arctic Circle and managed to get to Rotterdam or Europe, Felixstowe, I believe, within 20 days. Normally, it would take, even using the Suez Canal, longer than 20 days. Now, whilst this sounds really good, we're getting faster ships or faster way in which to export, there are other issues that potentially are out there. You would need to have an icebreaker in front. You would need to have permission to go through the Russian waters, and that permission may come at a particular cost. Who are you paying? Have they got sanctions against them? In addition to which, assuming that there was everything in the world was all lovely and hunky-dory and everyone was loving each other, and there would be no fee for going through Russian waters, um, what if a vessel breaks down? Where are the tugs, the barges, and the other vessels that could actually rescue? So a GA element in terms of an accident whilst traveling through the Arctic Circle, that could present another bunch of issues, cost expenses, etc. So whilst the shipping world are looking at alternative routes, those alternative routes may need to be looked at by insurers, and brokers may need to talk to clients that if vessels are doing this, then this presents a certain different type of risk and may therefore require a different type of risk consideration in terms of premium. Now, when we talk about new risks, noted on the on the on the poll, that a lot of the action seems to be the concern over lithium-ion batteries. Okay, get that, understand that. Um, Now, a lot of insurers have turned around and gone, okay, we can risk manage this, but can they? Is there a safe way in which to ship this stuff? Um, I've I've seen a number of reports and a number of issues around lithium-ion batteries. Sometimes it's just something that's going to happen. Perhaps lithium-ion batteries need to be shipped at very less charge held. But there again, if the battery has not had a charge from the time of leaving its factory, nobody would know whether or not that battery is good or bad. So there's a catch-22 situation there. Technology. Okay. Um, Now, this one is quite interesting because I've said earlier on about the need to actually have somebody as opposed to a nobody or a nothing. Um, what I would also like to add onto this is that from my perspective, I see the threat of technology as more and more are moving into the technological element of things that are potentially not thought about, things that can go wrong. There have been some spectacular robberies where high value goods had all of these trackers, and yet somehow or other, those trackers um, did not necessarily help and perhaps possibly hindered the safety of those cargoes. There's all sorts of information on those particular types of elements. So if I now take a look at market-wide challenges, uh, I've put a whole bunch of these things down um, that I see as market-wide challenges. Some of these would not necessarily be new. Um, we have weather events, which are, I would suggest, climate issues. You have natural events, which I would suggest are things like earthquake, although weather events could in fact be natural events. Um, there's still a huge amount of misdeclared cargoes, which are causing fires on board ships. We have pandemics. Well, okay, what's next in the pandemic world? The pandemic actually impacted the cargo area in many different ways. We understand that we are involved with the economics of the world, which is basically a simple supply and demand. Well, you could actually have an issue where regards a area is closed down, and that area happened to be the supply line. They've closed down because of pandemic, but the demand is still there. So the demand being still there, but the supply has dried up. That therefore pushes up the price, which then adds to the inflationary pressures. Now the reverse can also happen, where the supply is still in line, the supply is still strong, but of course the receiving end, that's gone into lockdown. So nothing is coming in, nothing is going out. So consequently, you could have a 3, 4 month period whereby trade has ground to a halt. That trade grinding to a halt leads to containers being in the wrong place, leads to all sorts of other issues for which cargo is then stuck somewhere. The digital revolution, we can talk about misappropriation. Now, misappropriation is something that has recently been brought in within the world. And the real problem that you've got with something like digital is that you've lost the human contact. You've lost the idea of man or a team going into a warehouse, doing a proper stock take, counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we understand that is what we've got. With the digital warehouse being hacked or attacked or whatever, or being controlled, goods could actually be moving in and out, and nobody knows where they are, what they're doing, because maybe the documents could be fraudulent. Maybe it's a digital transaction that nobody can actually understand and track. So when somebody turns up and says, there should be 4,000 gold bars here, when somebody actually turns up, there's only 2 gold bars. Where have the others gone? Don't know. Clever thieves or clever crimes are being created. And I would suggest that a lot of that is down to organized crime. The biggest, the biggest organized crime, I think, was one of the European ports that had actually been hacked and was involved with the drug trade, and all of the drugs in the containers, etc., were being stored at the port. But whenever anybody went round, they were all looking in the wrong place because the guys that were controlling it could actually control where people actually went. I put up their significant tariffs, da-di-da. Okay, a lot of this I've already covered, so I don't really want to go through that again. Um, I've also put in as one of the challenges, how are people doing their budgeting? I have no idea. Many years ago, it used to be quite simple because companies would just turn around and say, okay, I'm going to increase my values of sales, my turnover, by 10%. Yeah, great. Okay. In today's world, how can you say that you are going to increase your values by 10% and then find that they're subject to tariff? The demand for your goods has suddenly gone down. So there are a whole bunch of issues here that are totally beyond the insurer's control. How does the insurer know that they are getting a fair price on their reinsurance if they don't really understand how much premium they're going to be getting in? because if things are going to slow down in terms of the sales, in terms of the earnings of that particular company, there is going to be pressures placed on premium income that nobody is going to be really able to understand or budget for. Many years ago, it was very, very different. So I'm going to basically now on the wind up stage give you my views and my comments. And these are basically just my thoughts and my thought process, having gone through this particular idea of where do we stand in terms of a marketplace. That first comment, I think, is self-apparent. The marine cargo market definitely must maintain flexibility and adapt to the new world situation. The new world just keeps changing. The challenges are all so numerous. The landscape changes just because there's a new American president. Um, in some of these instances, we as an industry have little or no control. The shifts in market demands. Again, I have thought processes in respect of the value of tariffs and what it's supposed to do. We understand that the concept of a tariff is trying to lessen the import, but at the same token, if the demand is still there, people are still going to buy. So how is all of this going to be managed? I suggest that the changing climate is going to potentially have a serious threat in terms of not only the severity of loss, but maybe the frequency of loss. And again, we've run into all sorts of things such as increased risk, increased hazards, increased elements just simply because somebody has said, oh, let's change the route. So we mustn't sit on our hands. We must still be innovative. There have been innovative solutions in respect of the war risks for the Black Sea the Black Sea grain coming out of Ukraine. At one stage, nobody was going anywhere near it because the war risks were too high. I put on here about mitigation by risk management. But how can risk management be strong enough to actually take into account natural risks? How can risk management assist in terms of the new products, the lithium ion batteries? Strong reinsurances need to be put in place. But again, the price for the reinsurance is maybe potentially going to have an impact on the price of the direct insurance. Yeah, the last point that I put here about the underwriting discipline, that I think still remains to be key. But of course, the other issue to the underwriting discipline is that the market needs to control itself. That concludes as far as I'm concerned. So I'll hand back to Perry if there are any questions that have been asked. But just before I close off, assuming that there are questions, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank you for listening to an old man getting on his soapbox, um, trying to work out the ills of the insurance market in respect of cargo. and I keep qualifying in respect of cargo because other fields of insurance have their problems. I hope that I've raised some awareness. Thanks to the SCI for arranging the webinar. And one key point that I always forget, don't forget to bank your CPD points.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Neil, for that insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite questions. If you have any questions, you can type it in the Q&A box. I do have a question to start off for you, Neil. Given the rising costs in logistics and insurance, how can clients balance cost savings with maintaining sufficient cargo coverage?
Wow. Okay. In my experience, every single client that I have ever worked for as a broker, every single client that I have ever worked for would like to have his cargo insurance premium as low as possible. And sometimes there is a push for a lower premium, but the lower premium, 9 times out of 10, very often means moving a placement from insurer A to insurer B or C or D or E, in which case maybe the terms and conditions may alter. Now, 9 times out of 10, most insurers, and again, I've had all sorts of discussions with many buyers of insurance. What is the cost of insurance? Is that the rate or is that the premium? Now, the premium very often is a minimum and deposit premium. Sometimes the rate can be very different between insurer A and insurer B. That may be because of the terms and conditions that are being offered. We went through a phase where insurers were giving any sort of coverage that was that the client wanted, any sort of coverage that the client wanted. We then went through a recent phase where the market decided to start to get a little tighter. Now that focused on premiums and premium rates. Ultimately, it's up to brokers and insurers alike to sit down with their client to talk about things like deductibles, excesses. What if you increase that excess? Do you really need to claim for the first dollar? Can you not live with maybe $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 as an excess? Because look, Mr. Client, it's going to cost you money in order to run that claim file. You've got to go and get certain documents. You've got to go and get certain amounts of information. You've got to pay for that, but you are not going to get that on top of your claim. That is an expense that you are going to pay for in order to be able to get your claim. So things such as small claims, deductibles, risk management, that all comes into the equation with regards to premium rates, reductions. The marvelous thing is that some companies sit there, they look at things like the IUMI numbers, and in so doing, they demand, regardless of their loss history, that they should actually have a 10% rate reduction. Well, a 10% rate reduction when you are increasing your turnover by 20% may be plausible. But when your turnover is actually reducing, maintaining the same rate would reduce your premium. So there's a whole bunch of issues that go into what is a premium. So I hope I've answered your question there, Perry.
Yeah, thank you
I
so much.
there is no simple answer to how an individual client can
Yeah,
view.
yeah,
They ultimately want to pay nothing for the widest possible cover that they can possibly get.
yes. We have a couple of questions that just came in. What do you think will be the key drivers of change in the marine cargo market over the next decade?
Over the next decade. Uh, the reinsurance market, I think, is going to be one of the key drivers, provided that the reinsurance market make money. But again, the reinsurance market can be volatile because the way in which reinsurances are structured. I think the political element is also going to really, really grow in terms of the way in which it's going to influence the market trade, the way in which goods are bought and sold. So
Okay.
over the next 10 years, we're likely to see a lot more legislation, and we're likely to need to respond to that legislation. I can't tell you in what way because I've seen a number of changes in my lifetime.
All
So
right.
over the 10 years, probably the political economic elements are likely to be the key factors of most significant changes that we're likely to face. You add into that maybe a little bit of climate change, maybe a little bit of technology, maybe a little bit of new risk, if I can determine it as new risk, new products, new elements. If you'd have asked me this question maybe 4 or 5 years ago, nobody would have had any issue with regards to lithium ion batteries.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. There's another question on lithium batteries, but I think you have addressed that already, so I will not cover that one. One last question from Chanel Tong. What is the minimum deposit premium? Will this apply across all commodities and turnover? When do we charge the minimum deposit premium?
Okay, so a minimum and deposit premium. From the cargo perspective, there are generally two, three, four different types of premiums. The simple premium or the simple policy, which is probably at a higher rate, is generally a rate which is applied to a particular declaration. An assured has a requirement to make monthly, weekly, quarterly declarations upon which there are individual rates for individual voyages, for individual shipments of whatever the commodities happen to be. Many insurers work on the basis of I know who my manufacturer is, I know what they are manufacturing, therefore, I need to understand their budget, where they are selling. And so consequently, they're building a picture in order to be able to understand their estimate of what an annual premium is going to be. So with that estimate of the annual premium, insurers may turn around and say, right, okay, guys, instead of doing these monthly bills, we can do one bill at the inception and we do an amendment at the end of the policy. based on the final sales turnover. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated because what happens if the estimated budget was, let's say, $1 trillion at the 1st of January? We've sat down, we as a company have sat down, we've looked at our values, we've looked at our turnovers, we've looked at where we are. What happens if by December 31st, they then come in and they report that their sales turnover numbers was not $1 trillion, but $1 million? The premium rate that may have been charged on the $1 trillion might have been that big, but the premium rate, which would have been charged on $1 million, may have been that big. So there are pluses and minuses to a minimum and deposit premium. Now I use that particular phrase, minimum and deposit. Sometimes the deposit may be less than the minimum, or sorry, maybe the minimum should be less than the deposit. So a client pays, let's say, an amount of money, $1,000 at the inception of the policy. That policy is then left alone in terms of premium payments, etc., until the end of the year, in which case he may pay more than the 1,000, i.e., an additional premium, or he may have got something back because he didn't, because of the minimum provision. So
Okay.
hopefully that answers the question.
All right. We will do one last question from Chanel Tong again. Thank you, Chanel, for the questions. Do we have the rate for each commodity, rate for different commodities? How do we determine the rate each commodity?
Oh, okay. The rate for each commodity. Now that's an interesting question. I would argue that no, there is no such thing as a set rate. There are certain countries within the world that used to record all of the premiums, all of the rates, all of the voyages, and they would offer insurers some form of guidance. Now, that used to happen in Korea. It was called the Blue Book. Um, that still exists. That is a government-run organization that gather this information directly from the insurers. And somebody somewhere has to sit and enter all of these digits and numbers in. Now, going back to the question that was raised, a consignment of mobile telephones, iPhones in a container, or TV sets versus a container full of diesel engines, you've got two different types of risks. So therefore, you would anticipate that you have two different premium elements. Going back to the question from the same source that was asking about the minimum premium element, uh, if you have a manufacturer that is only manufacturing diesel engines and only exporting diesel engines, you could then get a premium because you would know where the sales are, what they're selling, and how it's going to be packed. There is some form of risk management that can then be applied to that should there be losses. Where you have a comparison between a diesel engine and let's stick with the high tech laptops or computers or telephones, that sort of thing. These are readily thievable. Um, there's a ready market for somebody to how should we say um, accept one of these things at a very low price because the man in the pub is selling it at sort of like a tenth of the price that he would have to pay to a shop. So consequently, you've got a different set of element of risks. If we then talk about manufacturers in the same industry, you, whilst the industry would have the same problems in terms of risk management and that type of thing, ultimately you have different types of clients that um, would need to understand why their rate is different to somebody else's. So it's not normal. The driver in terms of setting premium rates is not necessarily going to be the commodity. It's going to be the client, the information, the assured, the way in which they ship, the terms of purchase and sale that they get involved with, the countries that they're shipping to. So there's a whole bunch of issues, but hey, cargo is easy.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you, Neil, for sharing your wonderful insights on the marine cargo landscape. Thank you for those who have contributed the questions. It's been a lovely session. So we have to call it to a close. And on behalf of the Singapore College of Insurance, thank you all for your support and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Darren.